The rain had been falling since dusk, soft at first, then steadier, as if the sky had grown tired of holding itself together. From the 27th floor, Daniel Carter watched the lights of Seattle smear across the wet glass, their reflections bending and breaking like tiny trembling secrets. The city below hummed, cars whispering over soaked asphalt, ferries gliding through the fog toward Bainbridge Island. A world moving on, indifferent to the stillness inside his apartment. It was almost midnight. Emily should have been home hours ago. He had cooked, or tried to. 2 plates of pasta sat on the marble counter, one already cold, the other untouched. The bottle of red wine he'd opened at 7 now stood half empty, its cork lying beside a small puddle of condensation. He checked his phone 12 times, refreshed her messages, scrolled through news notifications he didn't care about, and stared at the clock long enough to feel every second slide off his patience. When the phone finally buzzed, the sound startled him. "Don't wait up for me." No punctuation, no apology. Just 7 words, ordinary and sharp as a blade. Daniel stared at the screen until it dimmed to black. The reflection of his own face stared back. Tired eyes, a faint beard he hadn't bothered to shave, the shadow of a man who couldn't tell if he'd just been dismissed or warned. He wanted to call her, to ask where she was, who she was with, why her tone sounded like a stranger's. But he didn't. He told himself it was dignity, that calling would make him small. But deep down, it was fear. Fear that the truth had already begun, and that his silence was just him trying not to confirm it. He poured another glass of wine and wandered toward the balcony. The air was cold, the kind that smelled faintly of sea salt and rain-soaked concrete. Across the bay, the Space Needle pierced the mist like a silver memory. He thought about their first date, a rainy afternoon not unlike this one. Both of them huddled under a too-small umbrella, laughing as their shoes flooded with puddles. She had looked at him then with that unguarded smile, the one that made him believe love was simple. Now the laughter was gone, replaced with schedules, deadlines, and small silences that grew like cracks in glass. They used to talk about building a house together, somewhere near the water, something minimalist, all white and wood, with wide windows that caught the morning light. He'd even drawn the first sketches once. Then projects piled up and the sketches ended up buried under contracts, forgotten in a drawer. He went inside and opened his laptop, more out of habit than intention. His inbox was full of client updates, but one email caught his eye, an old reminder from 2 years ago. Dinner with Emily, anniversary. He hadn't deleted it. He hovered over the trash icon, then closed the laptop instead. The clock hit 12:47 a.m. He moved through the apartment as if retracing ghosts. Her scarf on the couch, a book face down beside her reading chair, a half-empty mug that still smelled faintly of vanilla. Each object seemed to accuse him of something unspoken. Daniel sat down and tried to remember the last time he'd seen her truly happy. Maybe it was last spring, when she came home talking about a new colleague, Adrian, that was the name. She had laughed while describing how eccentric he was, how he still wrote on paper instead of typing. At the time, Daniel had barely listened. He'd been finishing a project bid. Now the name echoed. He picked up his phone again, typed, "Where are you?" then deleted it. He typed again, "Are you okay?" deleted it too. Finally, he placed the phone face down and whispered into the empty room, "Don't wait up for me." His voice cracked on the last word. A siren wailed somewhere far below, fading quickly into the distance. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. The wine made his chest warm, but his hands cold. He thought of every conversation they'd avoided in the past year, the nights they'd gone to bed without a word, the polite smiles at breakfast. He'd convinced himself that love matured into quiet comfort, but maybe it had just gone numb. He imagined Emily somewhere under the same rain, standing outside a building, maybe waiting in a car, maybe laughing with someone else. The thought didn't ignite rage, it hollowed him. When he finally rose, he turned off the lights one by one. The apartment darkened slowly, until only the reflection of the city remained, 1,000 windows glowing against the storm.
He left her plate on the counter, untouched. In the silence, Daniel whispered a line he once heard from an old film. The hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing they were never really yours. Then he walked to the window again, watching the rain blur the city until everything, the lights, the buildings, even his own reflection, dissolved into one endless gray. Tomorrow he would pretend to start again. But tonight, he finally understood that something had already ended.
The morning came without sunlight, just a pale, bruised sky pressing against the glass, the kind of Seattle gray that made time feel suspended. Daniel woke on the couch, still in his work shirt, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table beside him. His phone blinked once, silently, as if reminding him the world was still moving, even if he wasn't. Emily hadn't come home. He sat up slowly. The air inside the apartment felt stale, almost heavy, as if it had absorbed every thought he'd had the night before. The pasta on the counter had dried into something shapeless. Her scarf still lay where it had fallen. Nothing in the room had changed, except the way he saw it now. He checked his phone again. No new messages, no calls. He opened their shared calendar. Her schedule for the morning was blank. At 7:43 a.m., Daniel typed a text and stared at it. "Are you okay?" He didn't send it. He imagined the message appearing on her screen somewhere, a quiet intrusion, an accusation disguised as concern. Instead, he went to the shower. The water came out lukewarm, beating rhythmically against the back of his neck. He tried to focus on the day ahead, a client presentation, a design pitch, but the words blurred in his mind. For years, he'd been known as the one who could make concrete feel like poetry, who could turn blueprints into emotion. But this morning, his own life felt like a structure collapsing from the inside. When he arrived at the office downtown, the glass doors reflected a version of him that looked more exhausted than he wanted to admit. The receptionist smiled politely. "Morning, Daniel." He nodded back. "Morning." In the elevator, a group of interns chatted about some viral video. He caught a glimpse of his reflection again. Eyes rimmed red, tie slightly crooked. He straightened it, pretending it mattered. At his desk, the glow of the computer screen felt almost cruel in its brightness. A Slack message popped up from his assistant, Claire. "Client meeting at 10. Are we still good with the Madison concept?" He typed back, "Yeah, let's go with it." But his focus drifted. On his desktop, a photo of Emily smiled at him, the two of them standing on a wooden pier in Oregon, her hair caught by the wind, both of them laughing at nothing. He hesitated, then minimized it. At 9 o'clock, he opened his email and saw a message titled Staff Directory Update, University of Washington English Dept. Emily's name was there. He clicked the link without knowing why. Her faculty photo, the same one she'd complained about last year, stared back, poised, elegant, unreadable. He scrolled further down. Another name stood out. Adrian Wells, visiting lecturer. Something tightened in his chest. He clicked on the faculty bio. Adrian Wells, PhD in comparative literature, focus on 19th century romanticism. The headshot showed a man in his early 40s, confident, with that careless kind of charm people either admired or distrusted immediately. He closed the tab. By 10, he was sitting across from clients, nodding, presenting sketches. His voice was steady, his gestures precise, but every sentence came from muscle memory. He was performing a version of himself, the calm architect, the problem solver. No one noticed that his hands were trembling slightly under the table. During the lunch break, Claire approached his desk. "You okay? You seem quieter than usual." He forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep much." "Too much wine or too much work?" she teased. He wanted to say both. Instead, he shrugged. Something like that. When he got home that evening, the apartment looked exactly as he'd left it, except emptier. He placed his keys down, listening to the echo. No scent of her perfume, no shoes by the door, just silence. Daniel opened the fridge, then closed it again. He wasn't hungry. He sat on the couch and opened his laptop, scrolling through old messages between them.
The early ones were full of warmth. Can't wait to see you tonight. You make everything feel lighter. Then, as the years went by, the tone changed. More logistics, fewer words. Pick up groceries. Dinner with the Harrisons, 7 p.m. The affection had evaporated gradually, like heat escaping through an open window. He leaned back, eyes half closed. The rain started again, faint at first, then steady. Then his phone vibrated. A new message from Emily. We need to talk. Not tonight. Soon. He read it twice. No greeting, no explanation, just the promise or threat of a conversation. Daniel typed back, okay, then stopped, deleted it. If she wanted space, he'd give her all the space she needed. He stood by the window again, watching the lights of the city shimmer through the drizzle. Somewhere out there, she was moving through the same rain, breathing the same damp air, and yet she felt unreachable. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. In the reflection, he looked like a man half drowned.
The night stretched long and slow, with rain whispering against the windows like a confession Daniel couldn't quite hear. The message from Emily, we need to talk, not tonight, soon, replayed in his mind until the words began to lose meaning. He sat on the couch, half in shadow, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city. At 1:15 a.m., he finally stood, not out of decision, but restlessness. He walked to the kitchen for water, and that's when he noticed it. Emily's tablet, left beside the fruit bowl. The case was slightly open, the screen faintly smudged with fingerprints. He hesitated. For a moment, he almost smiled. She never left it behind. It was her diary, her library, her classroom all in one. He told himself he wouldn't open it, that doing so would make him small, desperate, unworthy of the man he thought he was. But then he remembered the text, those 7 words that turned their home into a question mark, and the part of him that still needed truth reached out before his conscience could stop it. The screen blinked to life with a soft glow. No password. She'd never hidden it before. He froze for a heartbeat, then swiped. The familiar layout appeared. Lecture notes, reading lists, emails. Everything normal. Until he saw a folder titled Drafts. He clicked it. Inside were messages, unsent, unaddressed. Some written weeks ago, others just days. The first began simply, Daniel, I don't know how to tell you this without breaking what's left of us. He read it once, then again. The tone wasn't angry, it was sorrowful, exhausted. Another draft read, you stopped seeing me long before I disappeared. You talk about light, about design, about how space makes people feel. But when was the last time you looked at me like I was still there? His throat tightened. He wanted to look away but couldn't. The next few messages were shorter, fragments, apologies that never found their moment. And then one line caught his breath. Adrian understands the silence. He listens to what I don't say. He stared at that sentence until his vision blurred. He could almost hear the way she might have whispered it, quiet, deliberate, half guilty. For a long time he sat there, letting the truth settle. The apartment felt smaller, the air colder, the rain outside turned to a dull percussion against the glass.
He scrolled further. Photos of lecture halls, scanned pages of old novels, a few selfies, nothing overt, but enough to paint a picture of intimacy. Shared books, late-night notes, inside jokes buried between lines of poetry. One image stopped him completely, a coffee cup on a desk, and beside it, a handwritten note that read, "Next time, bring your architect stories." The photo was time-stamped 3 weeks ago. He closed the tablet and placed it back exactly where it had been. His hands were trembling. He went to the living room and sat down, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. Betrayal, he realized, wasn't always a thunderclap. Sometimes it was a slow leak, so quiet you didn't notice until the floor beneath you was already sinking. He poured a drink. The whiskey burned down his throat, but it didn't help. He thought of Emily writing those words, alone in some cafe, her fingers hovering over send and then stopping, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of mercy. And then, uninvited, came the question he didn't want to face. Would I have done the same if I felt unseen long enough? He hated himself for even considering it. Daniel opened his notebook, the one he used for sketches, concepts, ideas that never made it to clients. Tonight, he began to draw lines without knowing why. But as the shapes formed, he realized it was their home, the one he'd promised to build. Only this time, he changed something. The walls curved inward. The windows faced nowhere. A structure without light. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. At 3:20 a.m., he stood by the window again. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the city asleep. He whispered to no one, "You didn't even send it." It was almost funny how her silence had said more than her words ever could. The tablet sat on the counter, dark now, but still pulsing faintly with the last glow of its screen, like a heart that hadn't yet realized it had stopped beating. And somewhere deep down, beneath the anger, beneath the pain, Daniel knew something final had shifted. Whatever talk Emily wanted soon, it would no longer be a conversation between lovers. It would be an autopsy.
It took Daniel 3 days to decide what to do next. 3 days of half-slept nights, of going through work like a ghost behind glass, pretending to function while the world moved in clean lines and familiar patterns. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't rage, didn't confess. Instead, he studied the quiet, his new companion. On the 4th morning, the sky over Seattle broke into a dim gold. Daniel sat in his parked car across from the University of Washington's English department, the same place Emily had spent countless evenings grading papers, leading discussions, smiling politely at conferences. The building's brick facade glowed faintly under the drizzle. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for until he saw him. Adrian Wells emerged from the entrance, laughing with another faculty member. He was exactly as Daniel had imagined from the photo. Early 40s, tall, that soft kind of confidence that makes people lean closer when you speak. A charcoal coat, dark scarf, a coffee cup in hand. The man had presence. Effortless. Daniel watched as Adrian said goodbye to his colleague, then headed down the street toward the cafe on the corner. Cypress Coffee, a place Emily used to mention but Daniel had never visited. The decision came not as an impulse, but as inevitability. He followed. Inside, the cafe smelled of espresso and rain-soaked wool. Students filled the small space, heads bent over laptops, the sound of typing and low conversation blending into a hum. Adrian took a seat near the window, ordered black coffee, and began reading from a worn paperback, The Sorrows of Young Werther. Daniel approached the counter, ordered the same thing, then took the seat across from him. Adrian then looked up, startled then polite. "Sorry, were you—" "Daniel Carter," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Something flickered across Adrian's eyes. Recognition, then restraint. "Ah, Emily's husband." Daniel nodded. "That's right." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. Daniel studied him, not just his face, but his posture, the way he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his eyes holding steady yet cautious.
"I'm not here to make a scene," Daniel said finally. "I just needed to see you." Adrian set the spoon down. "And now that you do." "I'm still figuring that out." Adrian leaned back slightly, watching him. "If you're expecting an apology, I'm not sure it's mine to give." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You knew she was married." "I did," Adrian said. "But I also knew she was lonely. There's a difference." The words landed harder than Daniel expected. He looked down, tracing the rim of his cup. "You think that makes it right?" "No,"
Adrian said quietly. But maybe it makes it understandable? Daniel's hand clenched, then relaxed. He looked at the man across from him, the man who had read the same poems Emily loved, who had probably listened when she spoke about her fears, who had looked at her the way Daniel once did. He wanted to hate him, but he couldn't. Instead, he felt something colder. Pity. "You think you know her?" Daniel said. "But you only know the part of her that needed saving. The rest, the messy, ordinary parts, you haven't met yet." Adrian smiled faintly, almost sadly. Maybe. Or maybe she didn't want to be ordinary anymore. The conversation paused there. Both men sat in the heavy quiet that follows a truth no one wanted to voice. Daniel stood. "She left her tablet at home," he said. "I read what she wrote. She never sent it." Adrian's gaze lifted. For the first time, his expression faltered. "Then maybe she still believed you'd notice before she had to." Daniel exhaled, slow. He didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the suggestion that it might have been preventable. "I don't know what she told you," Adrian said softly, "but whatever it was, she didn't hate you. She was just tired of being invisible." I nodded. "So am I." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You'll understand something someday, Adrian. When love dies, it doesn't vanish. It lingers. It infects everything you touch after it." Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet cedar and exhaust. Daniel walked back toward his car, the city pulsing faintly around him. Students laughing, buses sighing. The world unbroken. He didn't feel victory, only clarity. In the rearview mirror, he caught one last glimpse of the cafe window. Adrian sat still, staring out at nothing, his book untouched. For the first time in days, Daniel breathed without shaking. The truth was sharp, but it was also strangely cleansing. As he drove away, he thought not of Adrian, but of Emily, and of the version of himself he had stopped being long before she ever reached for someone else.
The courtroom was silent. The air was thick with tension, as if every breath carried the weight of judgment. David sat across from Anna and Mark for the last time. The people who once shared his home, his table, his laughter were now strangers. Or worse, enemies. The judge's voice broke the silence. After reviewing the evidence, the court rules in favor of Mr. David Miller. The company ownership and all related assets are to be returned immediately. It was over. Just like that. A gavel fell, and justice, at last, was on his side. Anna's face went pale, Mark clenched his fists, his jaw trembling in anger. They didn't say a word, but their silence screamed defeat. As David walked out of the courtroom, flashes from the cameras followed him. Reporters shouted questions. How does it feel to win? Will you forgive them? Is this revenge? He stopped for a second, looked into the chaos, and simply said, "It's not revenge. It's closure." Outside, the rain began to fall, the same way it had the night Anna first didn't come home. But this time, David didn't feel broken. He looked up at the sky, let the rain wash over him, and smiled faintly, because this rain wasn't the beginning of his pain anymore. It was the end of it. He drove to the cliff where he and Anna once watched sunsets together. The ocean stretched endlessly below, and the horizon burned with orange light. He took off his wedding ring, the last piece of her, and held it in his palm. For a moment, the memories flashed before him. Her laugh, her voice, the way she once looked at him like he was her whole world. Then, with one calm motion,
He let it fall into the sea. The ring disappeared beneath the waves, swallowed by time, by truth, by everything that no longer mattered. David whispered softly, "Goodbye, Anna." As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I have information about Mark's offshore accounts. They weren't acting alone." David stared at the screen. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it, moving on, letting peace finally settle in. But something in his eyes changed. A flicker of the man who refused to be a victim ever again. He typed back slowly, "Tell me everything." The screen faded to black. But his story wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a new one.
The message replayed in David's mind over and over again. They weren't acting alone. For days, he couldn't shake off those words. He had won the court case, reclaimed his company, and supposedly closed that dark chapter of his life. But now, a new shadow loomed. Deeper, quieter, and far more dangerous. That night, David met the mysterious sender. A woman in her late 30s, sharp eyes beneath a black umbrella, waiting for him at a small riverside cafe. "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, sliding an envelope across the table. "I used to work in your company's accounting department, before your brother and Anna took over." David frowned. "And now? I work for myself, which means I'm free to tell you things I wasn't allowed to say back then." He opened the envelope. Inside were copies of bank transactions, contracts, and signatures he didn't recognize, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. But one name stood out: Elias Grayson, a billionaire investor, a man David once pitched to, but who mysteriously backed out right before Mark and Anna's betrayal. The woman leaned in. "Your brother didn't have the brains to pull off this whole thing. Elias funded it. He used Mark and Anna as pawns to take your company's tech, the AI security patents you created, and sell them to a private military contractor." David's jaw tightened. All this time, he thought revenge had ended with them, but the real puppeteer was still out there. "Why tell me this now?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because Elias doesn't leave loose ends. I've seen what happens to people who cross him." David's eyes darkened. "Then we'll make sure this time he's the one who can't hide." Over the next week, David quietly built a new war room, not in an office, but in the same apartment where everything had once fallen apart. He studied every paper, every email, every transfer. The trail led to Grayson Industries, a multinational firm that disguised corruption behind charity and innovation. One night, his old friend and lawyer, Ethan, stopped by. "You're playing with fire, David," Ethan warned. "Elias isn't like Mark. He doesn't just sue people, he destroys them." David looked up from his laptop, his tone calm but cold. "Then it's time someone destroys him first." Ethan sighed. "You don't even know what you're walking into." David turned the screen towards him. A map, a list of aliases, and flight records. "Oh, I do. He's in Geneva next week, hosting a global summit about ethical AI." He smirked. Perfect place for a hypocrite to get exposed. A week later in Geneva, the Grand Hall glittered with wealth and deception. Cameras flashed, investors smiled, and Elias Grayson stood at the podium, speaking about transparency in the new age of technology. But in the control room backstage, David watched him through surveillance feeds. Every word, every gesture, every lie. He pressed a button. On the giant LED screen behind Elias, The presentation glitched. Then, line by line, real bank records appeared. Offshore accounts, fraudulent transfers, and finally a security video. Elias shaking hands with Mark and Anna, dated 2 weeks before David's downfall. The room exploded into chaos. Journalists screamed. Investors stood up in shock. Elias froze, his mask shattering under the spotlight. David stepped out from backstage, calm, steady, unstoppable. Their eyes met for the first time. Elias tried to speak, but David cut him off. "You took everything from me, my company, my family, my peace." He stepped closer, his voice sharp as glass. "But you forgot one thing, Elias. You can't buy your way out of the truth." Security swarmed the stage. Reporters flooded in, and Elias was escorted out, shouting threats that no one cared to hear. As David walked out of the building, the same woman from the cafe called him. "You've just declared war," she said. "He'll come after you." David looked out over the city lights. "Let him. This time, I'm not the one running."
David didn't sleep that night. The city hummed beneath him, but every sound, the distant wail of sirens, the quiet rumble of trucks, the occasional bark of a dog, felt amplified, as though warning him that the world outside had shifted. Elias Grayson was no longer just a target. He was a predator, now aware he had been cornered. He packed lightly. Laptop, phone, cash hidden in compartments of his bag, a few essential clothes. Everything else could be lost. Everything else could burn. By dawn, he was gone. The apartment that once held the echoes of betrayal now held nothing but shadows. Seattle receded behind him as he drove north, toward the quieter coastal highways where the fog settled low, swallowing cars and sounds alike. Every mile felt like peeling off a layer of his old life. He wasn't running blindly. He was preparing for the inevitable strike, for the confrontation he knew was coming. Elias moved fast. By the time David checked his secure email, a single line stood out. "You think you can play in my world? I own it. I will find you." David exhaled slowly. No fear, only determination. He knew Elias's type. Power dressed as charm, arrogance dressed as control. He had underestimated one thing: the human cost. And David was willing to pay it, but he wouldn't lose his soul in the process. He stopped at a small coastal town inn, a quaint place with creaking floors, fog outside, and a single bar where locals murmured quietly. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, eyes scanning the harbor. Calm, ordinary, invisible. But he wasn't invisible. Elias's reach was long. Private investigators, digital tracking, social engineers, the man would use every tool. He knew he had a limited window before the storm hit. And then he remembered the letters Emily had written, long ago, never sent. Fragments of love, confessions, fears, moments he'd ignored. They had revealed truths about her heart, about his own failures, and about the consequences of neglect. He pulled the letters from his bag, unfolded them carefully, and read through the quiet words that now felt like guidance. Sometimes love dies not because of betrayal, but because it is unseen. When the person you trust the most turns away, don't let it destroy your own light. David realized something essential. He had been fighting battles in the wrong way. Rage alone could not protect him. Strategy, patience, observation, these would. For the next 2 days, he monitored Elias's movements from afar. He created digital maps of the billionaire's known associates, calculated flight patterns, and cross-referenced public and private records. Every meeting, every phone call, every casual interaction became a puzzle piece.
And then as night fell on the third day, the call came. The voice was calm, almost taunting. "Mr. Miller, you've made quite the mess. You think you've won, but your actions are about to cost you more than you can imagine." David's thumb hovered over the phone. Then he said simply, "I don't think about cost, only outcomes." He hung up. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and rain. The waves broke against the rocks like a warning. The storm was coming. And this time it wasn't just a boardroom battle or a courtroom drama. It was survival. David pulled on his jacket, tightened the straps on his bag, and stepped out into the misty night. Elias would strike. And when he did, David would be ready, not just to survive, but to finish what had been started years ago. The reckoning was near.
The night was colder than Daniel remembered. The kind of cold that seeps through clothes, through walls, through even the thickest sense of security. Seattle sprawled below him, a labyrinth of lights and shadows, indifferent to the battles of men. He stood on the rooftop of an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront, overlooking the docks where cargo ships lay moored like sleeping giants. He checked the perimeter one last time. Surveillance cameras had been looped, the entrances secured, every detail meticulously calculated. He wasn't just confronting Elias Grayson tonight. He was reclaiming the part of himself he had lost along the way. Dignity, patience, control. And then he saw him. Elias stepped out of the shadows, tailored coat catching the faint glow of the streetlights, his usual charm replaced by something sharper, alert, dangerous, aware that this wasn't just a meeting, but a reckoning. "Daniel," Elias said, smoothly, though his tone carried the weight of uncertainty. "You've come far. Too far." Daniel's hand stayed loose at his sides, his stance calm. "I came far enough to see the truth. And the truth is, you can't own people. You can't buy loyalty, love, or life itself." Elias laughed softly, almost amused. "You think this is about ethics, about morality. It's about power, Daniel. Always has been. Always will be." Daniel shook his head. "No, it's about consequences. Something you've forgotten exists." Without warning, Elias lunged toward him, a half bluff, half aggression. But Daniel was ready. The fight was brief, precise, controlled. It wasn't about brute strength. It was about presence, strategy, and the cold focus of someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything to reclaim. When it ended, Elias was pinned against the railing, the city lights flickering over his face, showing fear for the first time. Daniel's voice was quiet, almost intimate. "You made a mistake. You underestimated the one person who refuses to be a victim twice." Elias's smirk faltered. "And now what? You think justice will heal you?" Daniel looked past him, to the horizon where the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky with gold. "No, I don't need justice. I need peace." With that, he released him. Elias stumbled back, eyes wide, as if realizing for the first time that power could be stripped away without a courtroom, without money, without a fight anyone else could witness. Daniel stepped to the edge of the rooftop and gazed at the water below. He thought of Emily, the letters she never sent, the spaces where their love had faltered, and the silence that had finally spoken louder than words. He thought of Adrian, a man who had shown him another version of love, quiet but honest. And he thought of himself, not broken, not betrayed, but whole in a way that came from clarity and acceptance. He whispered into the early morning air, "Some endings aren't loud. Some endings are just light." The sun rose, painting the harbor in hues of orange and rose, as if the city itself exhaled after years of tension. Daniel walked away from the rooftop, his coat damp from the mist, his step steady. He didn't know what the future held, whether business would call him back, whether betrayal might touch him again.
But he knew this. He had survived. He had seen the truth, and he had reclaimed his own life. For the first time in a long time, he felt it. Freedom. And somewhere, deep in the quiet corners of his mind, he allowed himself a small smile. The storm had passed. The last light had arrived.